There's a place that will appear in history where few will remember, and that is a place where the forgotten were kept. It's not a prison you've seen in the movies, it's not a story in most history books, and yet what happened here still matters. There's places like this that remind us that how we treat people, how we hide them, and how we erase them leave scars that last for generations. So, who gets remembered? Who doesn't? And why does it matter today? This is Equity Matters, and we present to you Ain't No Sunshine Behind These Walls.
Of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem tells CBS News the ICE detention facility you may have heard at is known as Alligator Alcatraz. It could serve as the new model for other similar detention centers across the country.
Well, I've been there and I've seen these rooms that they are in. I wouldn't call them jail cells. I would call them a facility where they are held and that are secure facilities, but are held to the highest levels of what the federal government requires.
You are now listening to Equity Matters, where we champion equity in every conversation. I'm Dr. James Bell III, public health leader and storyteller, and I'm here to remind you, as always, that the narratives we share can move policy just as much as any law ever written. Today, we're going inside Alligator Alcatraz. Think of this as perhaps my investigative journalist episode. As we look into Florida's notorious detention facility, a place where isolation and oversight and profit all intersect. Here, people aren't just being detained, they're being hidden, they're being forgotten, and ultimately, they're being made invisible by the very systems that claim to protect them. This isn't just about borders or policy, it's about how easily humanity can be stripped away and how silence makes that possible. It's a story about human rights and about what happens when dignity becomes negotiable and when profit is placed above people. When you think about all of this, you start with the simple question of how does a detention facility end up in the middle of the Everglades? And why has it become one of the most controversial projects in Florida's history? And knowing Florida, that's saying a lot. They call it Alligator Alcatraz. It's a high security complex built on swampland, miles from public view. And state officials say it's about safety and order. But behind the fences, there's reports that share another story, and that's one of isolation and neglect and a system built on profit, not people. There are no neighborhoods nearby. There's no city lights, just water, wire, and walls. Inside, you've got people waiting in limbo. They've been stripped of their freedom and their identity. Their names have become numbers, and their stories have really been reduced down to paperwork because the system doesn't just detain them, it erases them. When a nation decides who is worth remembering, it also decides who can be forgotten. Facilities like this don't just hold bodies, they actually hold a mirror to what we're willing to look away from. Because if a person can disappear in daylight in a country that calls itself free, what does that say about us? You won't find Alligator Alcatraz unless you were looking for it. This isolation is not an accident, it's a design choice because the further away a facility is, the fewer questions get asked. You don't have journalists, you don't have family visits, there's no public eyes, there's just silence. And when you break that down, the distance isn't just physical, it's bureaucratic. Alligator Alcatraz operates in this gray space between agencies that's state funded, federally influenced, and privately managed. It's a triangle of responsibility where no one stands at the center because the state can point to the contractor. The contractor says that they're following federal guidelines, and the feds say oversight falls to the state, And in the middle of all that finger pointing, people vanish. They vanish physically and bureaucratically. Their complaints disappear into paperwork. Their medical requests get lost in the process. Even their names start fading from the conversation. That's the thing about systems like this. They're built to make invisibility look like order. And now neglect sounds like procedure. And after a while, you realize this isn't dysfunction, this is design. You shouldn't have situations where people wait weeks for medical care that may never come. You have families that drive hours only to be turned away at the gate because visitation has been suspended until further notice. Neglect cannot be your policy, and human suffering should never be your line item. The system has lost sight of the people inside of it, and profit has replaced care. So, outside of those walls, it can be easy for many of us to forget. That's also part of the design. If we never see the harm, we never have to face it. And we can slowly, over time, convince ourselves they don't exist. You may recall in the last episode, Under Siege, we explored the militarization of cities. And I think of this episode as a spiritual sequel, a look at the quieter, more insidious form of control where legality becomes the weapon. At Alligator Alcatraz, the people detained aren't criminals in the sense most Americans understand. Many are migrants, they're people who are fleeing violence, they're seeking opportunity, or simply trying to survive. Others are non citizens with minor immigration infractions. The root cause of their detention isn't threat or violence or disorder, it's paperwork, it's status, it's the ways that our laws are structured to treat some people as dangerous even when they pose no real risk. And somebody out there might be thinking, but shouldn't people who are in the country illegally be detained and deported? Isn't that just enforcing the law? Yes, the state has the power to enforce immigration law. That's not the question. The question is how it is enforced and what systems we build in the process. So here's my take. Alligator Alcatraz is wrong. It's not just poorly managed, it's not just controversial, it's wrong. It's wrong because it's built on the idea that human beings can be caged for profit. It's wrong because it treats legal status as a moral defect rather than a policy question. And it's wrong because it isolates people, erases their humanity, and turns suffering into a business model. So let me be clear, enforcing laws is not inherently immoral, but using law as a mechanism to profit from confinement, to hide people in swamps and shield the system from scrutiny, well, that's cruelty, plain and simple. I don't just think it's wrong, I know it's wrong. We have turned legality into a tool of oppression. The system isn't subject to scrutiny, and we have legitimized confinement. The law isn't failing them, it's being weaponized against them. You know, this country has a long history of disappearing people it doesn't want to see. When indigenous children were taken to boarding schools, it was called civilization. But what was civilization to them? It was the forced removal from their families, from their languages, from their identities. You had between 1819 and 1969, the US government operated over 400 federal Indian boarding schools across 37 states. And by 1926, more than 80% of Native American children were enrolled in these institutions, with enrollment peaking at over 20,000 students by 1900. These schools were not centers of learning, they were institutions of cultural genocide. Children were stripped of their native names, they were forced to cut their hair, they could not speak their language, they were punished for practicing their traditions, their spirituality, for being themselves. And then you also had reports of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse that were prevalent in these institutions. So many children suffered from neglect, from malnutrition, from harsh discipline, and nearly 1,000 Native American children died while attending federal boarding schools. Some from disease, some from malnutrition, some from abuse. And we wonder about intergenerational trauma, these lasting effects on Native communities. It adds to the cycle of poverty, of substance use, the loss of cultural knowledge. And yet, for decades, this history was buried. The stories of these children, their pain, their resilience, all of that erased. But the truth has a way of resurfacing because in 2021, the Department of the Interior launched the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative, and this was the first comprehensive federal investigation into this dark chapter of our history. The findings were staggering. Over 400 schools, hundreds of burial sites, and thousands of lives disrupted or destroyed. In 2024, President Joe Biden issued a formal apology on behalf of the U.S. government, acknowledging the harm caused and pledging to support healing and reconciliation. We all know how I feel about thoughts and prayers. Apologies are not enough. Acknowledgement is not enough. The policies that began with these boarding schools laid the groundwork for the systemic injustices indigenous communities face today, that they face in education, healthcare, criminal justice, and beyond. The infrastructure of invisibility that allowed these schools to operate unchecked still exists. It's the same mechanisms of erasure, denial, and indifference. So, just for a moment, think about what it takes to convince a child that their home, their language, their family, and their culture are wrong. To make them believe that the person they are isn't acceptable. That is cruelty. It's deliberate, it's structured, and it's state-sanctioned cruelty. And the hardest part, these children didn't have a choice. No one could advocate for them effectively because the system itself was structured to silence and to make suffering invisible. Now, if the cruelty of Indian boarding schools taught us anything, is that the state can justify almost anything when it's for protection or civilization. Think about the Japanese internment camps. During World War II, over 120,000 Japanese Americans, two-thirds of them, might I add, were U.S. citizens, were forcibly removed from their homes on the West Coast. Families were packed into these quickly built barracks surrounded by barbed wire and armored guards. Does that sound familiar? But here's the gag. It was legal. It was ordered by the government. It was framed as necessary for national security. And just like the boarding schools, the psychological and emotional toll lasted decades. You had survivors who carried trauma, shame, and loss into their adulthood. When we talk about facilities like Alligator Alcatraz, it's not just a story about a prison in the Everglades. It's a story about patterns in American governance, about the systems we build when we believe it's acceptable to disappear people in the name of safety, order, or profit. Speaking of profit, the machinery of invisibility is driven by profit. Alligator Alcatraz isn't just remote for oversight, it's remote because distance protects revenue streams. The state contracts with private companies to run the facility, and every bed filled, every person detained generates income. The longer someone stays, the more money changes hands. And this isn't theory, right? This is documented from your healthcare to food services, from security contracts, surveillance technology, private interests, profit, while oversight remains limited. Florida has committed over $245 million in contracts for Alligator Alcatraz. And the largest contract is around 80 million for staffing and management services. These contracts were awarded without competitive bidding. It was facilitated by an emergency declaration that loosened procurement rules. Now, as someone who has spent quite a bit of time in state government, I can understand why sometimes you need to make quick decisions based on emergencies and why you need that flexibility. But it's what happens after. It is the intent and the impact here. The facility itself is estimated to cost about $450 million a year to operate. Each bed is expected to cost $245 a day. That's what it costs to cage a single person in this facility. Think about it. For the same money, you could get a decent private hotel room, clean sheets, hot water, air conditioning, a working shower, might even get room service. You can have a hotel experience designed to meet human needs and comfort and dignity. The point isn't just the money, right? It's what the money buys or fails to buy. And the human cost, that's where it gets real. You have cuts to medical care, you have understaffed units, you have delays in legal access. These aren't accidents, these are incentives built into the system. And when confinement becomes profitable, it sends a message. And that message isn't just sent to the people inside, but to everyone outside those fences as well. It signals that some lives are more valuable than others, that suffering can be monetized, packaged, and administered without consequence. Some people are expendable, and their suffering doesn't matter. Alligator Alcatraz isn't just controversial in theory, it's actually at the center of an ongoing legal battle. There was a federal judge that ordered the facility's closure over environmental concerns, and, calling out the harm caused to the Everglades. But in early September, a federal appeals court temporarily halted that order, allowing the detention center to keep operating while the state appeals. And the reasoning? Because it's a state run project. The facility isn't subject to federal environmental review requirements. In other words, legality protects the system even when the impact is clear and destructive. So, how do we reckon with hidden systems of harm? First, we see them, we name them. We don't let the distance, bureaucracy, or legality make suffering invisible because Alligator Alcatraz isn't just a story about a prison in the Everglades. It's a story about the choices we make as a society and what we're willing to tolerate when cruelty is out of sight. Second, we hold the systems accountable because profit cannot be allowed to dictate confinement. Law cannot be used to erase humanity because oversight must be real and it must be transparent and it must be just. That means independent inspections of these facilities. It means clear reporting on staff, on medical care, on legal access. It means that whistleblowers should be protected and not silenced. And we have to fight for alternatives that center people over profit. It's about humanity over paperwork. I talked in Under Siege about the importance of what we invest in. And so when you have rehabilitation programs, mental health and addictions support, community-based supervision instead of cages, and timely legal processes, these aren't luxuries. These are obligations. You have countries like Norway and Germany that show us it's possible. Human, humane detention, rehabilitation, and public safety can coexist. Reckoning isn't easy. It demands that we confront some uncomfortable truths about our history, about the law, and about ourselves. It means asking hard questions. Why are some lives expendable? Why do we tolerate invisible suffering? But this confrontation is the only path toward a society where human dignity isn't optional and where justice isn't measured in profit margins. because we don't just want a system that works, we want a system that's right. As long as fear, profit, and bureaucracy are used as tools of control, we will continue to face these hidden systems of harm. Thank you to everyone who has been locked in with us. Your attention, your reflection, your dialogue, your prayers, all of that makes this work worth it. I truly appreciate it. I want you to turn those notification bells on for the next episode. Be sure to tune in, where I'm actually shifting focus a bit. I want to talk about Black men's health. It's a conversation that's been inspired by the recent loss of D'Angelo, talented R&B soul singer, and the stories his life makes us reflect on. So be sure to tune in for that. This has been Equity Matters, because equity always matters.